It is a Thursday morning get-together here on Birds 365. You got your Mac and Mac guys, me, Jordan McDonald, him, John McMullen, and we're counting down to a Monday nighter against Seattle. Extra day of rest, not practice, as we found out yesterday. But Johnny Mac got to spend some quality time with the Birds' two coordinators. What did you learn yesterday from either of the two coordinators in charge of the Philadelphia Eagle offense or defense, Johnny?
Oh boy, got to do a better job.
A lot of that.
I think there's a handbook somewhere around, floating around the NFL, and you have to subscribe to certain theories. One of them is.
Did Andy Reid write that handbook? By the way,
he had a big part of it. He had a big part of it.
Major contributor. Okay.
Bullet point number one is I got to do a better job. So, we know what it is at this stage, but both of those guys are feeling significant heat. And you can argue, I've said, look, I'm all for the criticism, criticize all you want. I do think it's absurd to talk about changing roles and firing guys when you're 10-3 and have the best record in the NFL, tied for the best record. That's just not realistic. I mean, I said it yesterday, you have 7-16, 6-17 fighting for their lives, right, to make the playoffs. They gotta win games down the stretch. They're not talking about firing their coordinators because they're in the mix to be a speed bump in the playoffs. Yeah. The expectations are out of whack, but there's plenty of criticism. I think fair criticism to level at the coordinators before you go down that route where you want to change everything in week 15, which is absurd, to be honest.
Well, Johnny Mac, I don't want to change everything, but I want to make a specific change for this game against Seattle. And it's a philosophical thing more than it is a drastic overall revamp the entire offense, change the way you go about playing defense. They're never giving up on the Vic Fangio overall thought process. So you're not. They
might at some point, but it's not going to be this season. They might.
Right. I'm talking about for this week. I'm talking about for this Sunday. It's not happening. But I was thinking about this last night, and it dawned on me. Maybe it's an epiphany. I don't know. For some reason, I thought about backing it up about 26 or 27 months ago. You got a clue as to what I'm referring to before I even go off on my
26? We're talking defensive 26, 20?
No.
Oh. You're talking
offensive.
about 20. You're talking about the play calling?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know where you're going.
It was Nick Sirianni's first year as head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was 2-5. And those who wanted him fired his first day on the job because he didn't do the greatest job handling his first press conference were chomping at the bit because the Eagles were 2-5. And see, I told you, should have turned around and fired him the day after. And Nick Sirianni et al. Did something significant. Sirianni passed the play calling off. He decided he was shirking his responsibilities as a head coach. He had enough trust in Shane Steichen to let him call the plays. He wanted to take over the team, be, as John likes to call it, a CEO coach, which we both agree is the preferable way of doing things if you've got everybody else in place to carry the water for you. And they did just that. And to Shane Steichen's credit, he said, we need to get back to what we do best. John, if we broke this Eagle team right here, right now, down into 8 groups, 4 on offense, 4 on defense, defensive line, linebackers, cornerbacks, safeties, offensive line, quarterback, running back, receivers, what would you say is the best group of those 8? You and I sat here before the season started and praised a guy whose name I can never remember from the NFL, Bucky Brooks, who said the Eagles' defensive line is the best unit of all units in football. We both said, yeah, he's probably right about that. We agreed with it. the Eagles' defensive line has not been that this year. They're not the best line, best unit in all of football. They're not the best unit on the Philadelphia Eagles. What do you think the best unit is?
What is the best? Well, it's offensive line, defensive front, and you can argue which one's better. I still think Eagles' defensive front is really good. They just haven't lived up to expectations. But it's definitely one of those two.
Okay.
And I would still lean defensively only because they're deeper, even though they're not as deep as they wanted to be, which is insane. They're deeper than the offensive line.
Yeah,
For that
that's why I would disagree with you, because they actually need depth on the defensive line because it's a substitution position. Guys come in off the bench, non-starters, and go in and have to do a job, not the same job as your starters do, because that's why they start, because they're better. The offensive line, if there are no injuries, you put 5 guys out there, same play, every play. So depth is more important on a defensive line. Therefore, if the depth isn't good enough, that does bring the defensive line and how you would look at them in comparison to everybody else across the league down a little bit. I think the offensive line is the strength of this football team, above and beyond anybody else. And they thought that back in 2021, and they said, we need to emphasize our strength. We need to run the football. And I know it's an age-old Philadelphia thing. I heard it on my show on WIP the other night, run the football. Guess
Starting
what?
early on me, Jody. I got to get this from Seth all weekend.
I'm getting on that bandwagon. You'll remember what happened back in 2021. They went in and ran the ball for over 200 yards against the Detroit Lions, put up a 30-some-odd spot against them. The next week against the Chargers, they got beat on a last-second field goal. Herbert was good, but the Eagles could have won that game. Got no time left on the clock. They got beat by 3 points, which I remember. The Eagles actually covered that game because I had the Eagles plus 3.5. They lost by a field goal. But they did win that game, and they rushed for almost 200 yards. Then they came back, rushed for over 200 yards against 242 against the Saints, rushed for 230 against Washington several weeks later. They got back to their roots. They got back to what they did well. That's run the football. It really does bring the offensive line together. There is an offensive line on the planet that would rather pass block than run block. They know pass blocking is their job, but they love to be the aggressor and move the other team forward. They need to run the ball down the Seattle Seahawks' throat this week, John. They need to reestablish themselves as a team that can run the football, will run the football, will run it down your throats until you put 9 guys in the box. Oh, and then, by the way, we got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and we're going to pick you apart. But first things first, you got to run the football. I know it's old school. No, it's a mantra in this town. But I think there is a method to the madness this week because they just did it 2 years ago. It started the Nick Sirianni era by being able to run the football. I think they need to go into Seattle and announce that they are going to be a dominant run team and do it against the defense, which is
well,
only okay.
you don't want to announce it, certaly. But,
announce via your stats at the end.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what went on. I think that the good part of what Nick did is sort of remake the offense. Remember when he came in, he still is. He is a huge, and when I say huge, Phillip Rivers guy. I mean, he loves Phillip Rivers. And he's mentioned it over the years. People have probably heard it. And he came in running that offense with Jalen Hurts. And, there were a couple games he's dropping back and throwing it 40-something times. And, he put a lot on his plate. Phillip Rivers, for those who quickly forget, was a very smart, very savvy veteran quarterback who could do a lot of things from a processing standpoint at a very high level. And that's sort of what Nick came off of. Now, I'll also mention he had to remake that offense in Indianapolis a number of different ways, and that was part of his strengths because he also had the end of Andrew Luck, who was a tremendously gifted quarterback. He had Jacoby Brissett, who had to go a complete different direction and persevered. So he did a lot of different things, but his preference, and I think people forget quickly, 11 personnel, throw the ball, blah, blah. And you still see it today. That's what he wants to do. That's his default setting. That's his default setting of a lot of coaches, to be honest. But to his credit, he scaled back and he mentioned a lot of guys. Brian Johnson was a big part of it. He went to his college friends and his college people, Matt Campbell at Iowa State and the guys he's close to, and studied the RPO game and put it into the equation and went heavy RPO. So I think, there's two things. I talk about it all the time. I talk about it on the show all the time. They have never been a team that just hands the football off traditionally. Earl Campbell, Derrick Henry, if you want to look at it now, Adrian Peterson, if you want to look at it 10 years ago, they have never been that. They were never that when they're running for 200 plus yards, and they've run for 200 plus yards more than any other team in the NFL over the Sirianni era. And a lot of that has to do with the offensive line, but a lot of it has to do with the quarterback and the quarterback's ability to manipulate the spacing of the opposing defense and threaten the opposing defense. And for whatever reason, that part of it hasn't been quite as good this season. Maybe certainly during the weeks that he was struggling with the knee injury, that was a big part of it, no question. Since he ditched it, he seems to have a lot more confidence and a lot more of what he had previously when it comes to the movement skills and things like that. But maybe because of the contract change, we talked about it dating back to the offseason. We didn't pay him more to do less, but that's kind of lip service, evidently, because he's been much more cognizant of protecting himself. I think it's a personal goal for Jalen Hurts to play all 17 games for the first time. And so I think all of this comes into it. They always want to run the ball. They want to run the ball effectively. They haven't run the ball effectively. Why haven't they run the ball effectively? Everybody's got their theories. Dallas Goedert's not in there. When Cam Jurgens wasn't in there. My personal theory is it hinges on the quarterback. The running backs, on and on and on and on. They need to run the ball effectively when they run the ball. But if you're asking, are they going to be a traditional old school running team? That's not what they do.
Right.
It's not what they've ever done.
If that's the assumption you had by what I said, then I apologize. I wasn't clear enough. Oh, I want them to run the football like they ran the football 2 years ago, which was, as you said, more RPO based than just turn around, hand it off, and the five guys drive block and see if they can push the defense back far enough. I get it. They're not going to do that. That's not their offense. They're not going to throw that in and become the dominant part of their offense in week number 14 in an NFL season. Not happening. No, all I want to do is turn back the clock 26 months. And I want to run the same offense that they did when they were 2-4 to get above 500, make the playoffs. Yeah, I know they got their tails kicked against Tampa, but there were a lot of reasons for that. Brady being the biggest, but they weren't ready. The Bucs were a legit Super Bowl contender. The Eagles were a 4-11-1 team the year before, and he improved. So, yeah, they got killed that day, but I'm not all that worried about that. The fact that they did what they did to make the playoffs is what I want to tap into, and it's RPO based. You're right, which means, yeah, we're calling Jalen out and saying you need to go back to being the guy you were 2 years ago. Yeah, they have Dallas Goedert. Yeah, they have Cam Jurgens, so you can't use they're missing a key aspect of the game. Yeah, I'm putting a lot on DeAndre Swift's plate this week. And I think he can handle it. I've been on the Swift bandwagon the last several weeks. Why Kenny Gainwell ever gets more touches than DeAndre Swift just boggles my mind. I want DeAndre Swift and Jalen Hurts as the RPO combo this week, getting a ton of touches and runs against the Seattle Seahawks. And I think they can, we use this word from time to time. Different people have different definitions of it. Dominance. I want them to dominate the game and dominate it at the point of attack and dominate it on the offensive line. And if it's RPO based, so be it. I got no problem with that. But I want DeAndre Swift and Jalen Hurts running the football against the Seahawks.
Well, then, it truly has to do, I think, with the offensive line and the quarterback more than anybody else. I hesitate because, especially coming off a game that they had in Dallas, remember who their best players are when it comes to skill positions. And I never want to say, I don't want to use A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith, and especially coming off a week where they didn't perform, because I think they're going to have a big chip on their shoulder to get back to being what they typically are. And what they typically are, two of the Eagles' best players. So I'm very cognizant of leaning on my best players. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It could turn out to be bad on a particular week, as I mentioned, because they are human beings. They're not robots. Everybody from the best player on down has a bad game. But when really good players, and those are really good players, tend to have a bad game, they don't tend to have another bad game after it, because they're very competitive and they're, excuse me, they're very cognizant of the fact that they had a bad game. So I can't, I know what you're saying from a philosophical standpoint. I can't go fully down that rabbit hole simply because, their best players are the best players, and you got to lean on your best players.
Right. And there's a couple things. A couple of people checked in on the stream, knew this was going to be a response. The owner won't like it a little bit. Yeah, they're right. We know that that's the case. We know Jeff Lurie thinks you have to have this amazing downfield passing game to be able to win in the National Football League. And guess what? I don't disagree with Jeff. And I'm not, let me add this point, if, again, it hasn't come through yet. I'm not committing to this for the rest of all time. I'm not saying the Eagles need to turn back into the 1960 Green Bay Packers and run student left, student body right. No. I get it. The NFL is still a passing league. The rules dictate that it should be a passing league. You've got DeAndre Smith, I'm forgetting the Eagles. Why? A.J. Brown.
A.J. and Devontae.
Yeah.
Coming off bad games, too.
Both off bad games. 1 week. That's what I'm talking about. 1 week. After that, just get the Philadelphia Eagles reestablished as an offense that other teams have to fear everything that they come out with on a given week, and then you go back to using your best players. I'm not pushing their two very talented wide receivers aside and say, yeah, guys, we're not going to do this the rest of the year. No, of course not. They are a key element of this team if they're going back to the Super Bowl. Not this week. This week, it's got to all be about the establishment of the offensive line as the most dominant unit on this football team. Direct ahead, RPO, however you want to run it, but running the football, giving them chance to show their strength, their dominance. And then if the Eagles get a win, which I think they do if they do it well enough, and I don't know why they wouldn't, then you figure it out for the rest of the season. But this week has to be a photocopy of what they did in 2021 and come out and just run the ball down somebody's throats.
Well, you gave me reps for Seth, so I appreciate that. I'm ready. I'm ready for Seth in the running game talk.
Okay. Seth likes, we know what Seth likes. And I'm with Seth on this week. Doesn't mean the whole year. Doesn't mean from here into infinity. No. This week, come out and be a monstrous running team against the Seattle Seahawks. All right. He's McMullen. I'm McDonald. We are the Mac and Mac Birds 365 duo. We're going to make it a trio next. Our buddy from the Inquirer, lead columnist, Mike Sealski, WIP host with Glenn Mack now on Saturdays. I'll see if Sealski will buy Mike. Let's run it down their throats this week, way of doing things, and talk about where the Birds are going for the rest of the season with Mike Sealski of the Inquirer next here on Birds 365.